The Correction of Fools. A treatise quite useful and authentic. Begins with an elegant prologue to the same book. Since the correction of all things is the augmentation of them. Therefore, in many sayings of the philosophers, it is written that through art, nature is corrected in its motion, which it had in its first form, since no art can work except by means of nature, and nature itself works inwardly and secretly in art through the guidance of the artist. From this follows that the imitation of nature's virtue is both an enhancement and a labor, and the increase of the thing itself, since maturity completes its own stage, which nature could otherwise complete and cannot surpass, unless it is hindered by the opposite, although art does not transcend nature by creating a new nature, through simple labor. And it is said that art imitates nature, not that it builds a new one, but that it refines the virtue of that nature. Therefore, art begins to perfect ere nature falls short, namely, by uncovering the subtle nature hidden within and revealing it. From this, the mineral generates metals, but it cannot generate tinctures, although it does indeed secretly contain within itself the potential for tincture, as the philosopher says, nature contains within itself what it needs and what perfects it, unless it is moved by art and operation. Therefore, in our work, art is nothing other than an aid to nature, as is evident in many works of laypeople's arts, where nature first produces wood. Second, the burning of wood by fire turns it into ash. Third, art makes glass from the ash, and this is to be understood in such a manner. If the first matter of glass had not been hidden in the ashes, art could by no means have made glass from it without physical nature. And thus, understand that nothing can be extracted from things that does not already exist within them. Therefore, every species within its species, every genus within its genus, and every nature within its nature naturally brings about growth through the power of nature and produces fruit according to its own nature, and not in any nature contrary to itself. Since every seed corresponds to its own seed, as we say, with regard to generation. Therefore, nothing is generated from a human except a human, nor from any animal except one similar to itself. And with regard to imitating perfect nature, no art working simply as a servant of nature can act except through the composition of that nature. For if a worse foreign nature is introduced, art no longer simply imitates nature. But those worse ones infect that nature with foreign nature, and immediately it is no longer from it, as was hoped to happen. Since everything worse that works in any art strives to destroy the better, and everything better working in any art tries to perfect the worse. And therefore, it is necessary for every craftsman to know the nature of that thing whose nature his art imitates, otherwise, he himself, through true art, will be recognized as foolish. Of the usefulness of study. Study removes ignorance, and brings the human intellect back to true knowledge, and to the knowledge of whatever thing. Therefore, it is especially necessary, through the study of this pleasant work, to acquire knowledge, and through the physical teachings to sharpen the intellect, since in them lies the knowledge of truth. Therefore, if those who work do not despise study, they will sweetly taste the fruit coming from it. But those who refuse to study, and yet wish to work, should see whether the art itself is an imitation of nature, which the art itself must improve. For it is impossible for him to prepare the secrets of the philosophers to a perfect end. The wise say about these things that they pass into practice like a donkey to the table, not knowing to what they extend their snout, except in so far as the external senses, without intellect, through sight and taste, lead to food. Thus, they themselves, like donkeys, without good true principles, fruitful studies, and without the knowledge of natures, seek to perfect the works of nature and the secret of the whole philosophy, and the best work, which helps human morals, enriches with benefits, assists the poor, and preserves the human body safe, providing it with health, as one can speak of the virtue of that nature. And therefore, all those who love the pinnacle of this art should strive to persist in study, and draw truth from books, and not from false, deceitful, or fabricated tales. Because this art is not found except through continuous study, and the knowledge of the sayings of philosophers, or through faithful instruction from a knowledgeable teacher. For he who has been sluggish in reading books will not be able to be prompt in preparing things. Similarly, he cannot easily become accustomed to practice, whose mind refuses to labor in theoretical studies. On the natural principles of this art. Chapter 1. There is no doubt that this art has true principles, since nature itself forms metallic bodies from minerals. In the fourth book of the Meteorology, Aristotle distinguishes mineral bodies into stones, sulfur, and salts. And some of these are rare, noble, and some of them are ductile, while others are not. And the reasons and causes of their generation are evident there. Therefore, it is not necessary to say more about them here. What are the parts of minerals? Chapter 2. Mineral bodies are specifically distinguished into two parts, namely the metallic part and the mineral part. The metallic part, that is, metals which have their origin from mercury. And the mineral part, which does not derive its origin from mercury. Examples of metals include gold, the moon, Mercury, Jupiter, Mars, Saturn, and Electrum. Examples of minerals include salts, atrament, alum, vitriol, arsenic, ore pigmentum, and metals that originate from mercury. All metals that have originated from mercury are ductile and liquefiable, because their substance is aqueous in nature, mixed with a terrestrial substance in a strong mixture, so that one cannot be separated from the other. Therefore, that aqueous substance is forced to solidify more with cold after the action of heat, and they will thus be ductile or workable. Water alone does not solidify unless mixed with terrestrial dryness, which alters the watery nature, since in them the moisture is not oily, because their solidification comes from the dry terrestrial substance. Therefore, they do not dissolve easily, except through the action of intense heat on them, according to how strong and thoroughly mixed they are. How metals are specifically generated from mercury. Chapter 3. The nature of all things that can be liquefied is from quicksilver, mercury, and its substance, because the same quicksilver coagulates from the vapor or heat of white or red sulfur that is not burning. From this, Aristotle says in the fourth book of the Meteorology, if white sulfur is not burning, it solidifies mercury into good silver. However, if the sulfur is pure with a clear redness, and in it there is a fiery power that simply does not burn, it solidifies into the purest gold, better than the mineral it produced, because every dry substance naturally drinks its own moist substance, so that it remains continuous in its parts. Therefore, the vapor of sulfur that coagulates quicksilver is from a terrestrial substance, subtle, airy, cooked, and processed from the first mixture, united by the action of heat, after which it is elevated, cooked, and processed until it has the sulfurous power to coagulate quicksilver into metallic bodies. But when sulfur is simple or burning, it causes perfection or imperfection in metals, as will be shown later through examples of these, since their primary material is quicksilver, because when they melt, they are transformed into it by heat. It is certain that it was previously quicksilver, because all things are from it, into which they are resolved. Example of ice. The degeneration of mercury and the metals generated from it. Chapter 4. Quicksilver, in the first root of its composition, is made up of white earth, subtle, extremely sulfurous, with clear water strongly mixed in, until it becomes a single substance, not resting on a flat surface, nor adhering to the tangent, due to the dryness, which alters its watery nature. It is homogeneous in nature, because either it remains whole in the fire and is fixed, or it completely evaporates upwards, as it is incombustible and airy. And this is a sign of perfection. Therefore, when it previously runs through the sulfurous earth, heated, it ascends upwards. Therefore, its nature is such that it becomes more subtle through heat. Indeed, through continuous sublimation, it is excessively purified, boiled, and thickened, and gradually solidifies through white and red sulfur. When sulfur is dissolved many times, and the sublimated quicksilver is first coagulated, it is hardened by the action of heat, until, after thousands of years of successive natural work, it is coagulated into a perfect metal. From this indeed, in mineral vessels, nature works metals. In these works, therefore, anyone who wishes to perfect medicine from imperfection must imitate nature, although the bodies differ in their composition from quicksilver, which is generated from it, in the way that it is pure or impure, from pure or impure sulfur. For if quicksilver coagulates from pure sulfur, in which there is the power of fire, it will be simple gold. But if the sulfur is bad and weak, and mercury has a good substance, it converts it into brass. But if quicksilver is heavy, earthy, and impure, and sulfur is impure, fetid, earthy, and fixed in substance, it will become iron, which later is not easily melted. Stagnation probably means Jupiter, however, seems to have good quicksilver, but sulfur that is bad and not well mixed, and therefore it causes a hissing sound when heated. Lead has thick quicksilver, bad, of an unpleasant and foul taste, and of weak virtue, from which it is constantly corrupted by the violence of fire. Thus, metallic bodies differ from quicksilver, according to the sulfur within them, whether it is foreign or burning. This is thus considered, what virtue is in them, since a large quantity of sulfur is imperfection, while quicksilver is incombustible and airy, because sulfur is consumed and burns, and perfection in all work is hindered. These are the words of Aristotle in the 4th book of the Meteorology. It must not be believed that the philosophers were found in any lie, therefore they must be highly trusted. On the marvelous formation of those that do not originate from mercury. Chapter 5. However, there are smaller or medium minerals, as has been said, which do not derive their origin from mercury. And some of these are salts that melt easily in moisture, such as alum, common salt, ammoniacal salt, rock salt, and all types of salts. And some are virtuous, and do not melt easily with moisture alone, such as orpiment, arsenic, and sulfur, when the moisture of sulfurous bodies is mixed with viscous earth, in a strong mixture with the heat of boiling, until they become virtuous, and are first coagulated by cold. Atrament, however, are composed of salt, sulfur, and stones, and it is believed that in them there is a mineral power of some liquefiable bodies, which are made from them, such as quicklime, and the field of olives, which are generated from larger grains of ink, and they do not dissolve unless the saltiness in them, which is in the sulfur, dissolves with them, and they are first frozen by cold. And this already receives a mineral power from some bodies, naturally existing in the earth. That which receives the iron power will be red and earthy, like the olive. But that which receives the airy power will be a green quicklime. Whence it is possible for these two, namely the olive and quicklime, to be generated from it, although all these aforementioned things share in the mineral power with metals. But metallic bodies cannot be artificially made from them, since they are of a different nature, and because the metals, from their original material, namely, those that did not derive their origin from mercury, but from quicksilver, are distinct. I do not deny that with them sophistry can be introduced, to deceive people, because the blackness of lead can be removed, but in truth, lead always remains lead. Thus, craftsmen can make congelations through them, that is, extract moisture from mercury with dry substances, so that it appears as if mercury is coagulated, but that coagulation is the worst. Whence Aristotle says, alchemists should know that they cannot change the species of things, but they can make similar to them, that is, dye red with a yellowish color, so that it appears as gold, and dye white with whatever color they wish, until it becomes very similar to silver, as those who combine tin with copper and mercury, and from this make sophistic silver. And there is also purification through minerals in metals, and it is not impossible, and against these, reason does not stand, but against true gold and silver, which is by no means allowed to be made in nature and art, except through the reduction of bodies to their primary material. Thus, the species of things can be transmuted, as Aristotle previously stated. And this happens not through mere liquefaction, but through the resolution of coagulated mercury, when, with the mixture of its spirit, the body is transformed into mercury. On the difference between the generation of common sulfur, simple sulfur, and mercury. Chapter 6. Since sulfur is said to cause metals, it is the element of metals along with mercury. Now I address the difference in the generation of mercury and sulfur, although both are indeed causes of metals, namely essential mercury. Sulfur, however, is twofold, namely, living, active, and burning. Living sulfur causes metals, although they still differ from one another according to how much they are affected by the viscosity of the earth. However, simple living sulfur, which causes gold and silver, is nothing other than a hot and dry vapor, generated from the purest terrestrial dryness, in which fire predominates in every aspect. This is called the element of metals along with mercury. But the generation of common sulfur differs from the generation of mercury, as mentioned above, because the aqueous nature of common sulfur is mixed with extremely viscous earthiness, along with intense heat, and it has become oily. Thus, the generation of mercury differs in the second aspect from the generation of this sulfur, since it is generated from the most subtle, white, sulfurous earth, combined with the clearest water. This mixture is so strong that one cannot be separated from the other until it settles on a flat surface, nor does it adhere to anything it touches due to the dryness of the earth, which has altered the aqueous nature through the force of the strong mixture. Therefore, it is the element, along with simple sulfur, of all ductile metals or is very similar to some ductile substances. And therefore, due to their agreement in some way during generation, sulfur is mixed with mercury, and one alters the nature of the other. Therefore, every metallic body is recognized to expressly contain sulfur within itself. When it melts with the heat of fire, mercury and sulfur appear there, mercury in its substance, sulfur in its color, and as a red film, skin, floating on the surface. Thus, it is proper for one to adhere to the other, since one cannot be generated into metal without the other. And the simpler the sulfur is, the more it rejoices in and adheres to simple and pure mercury, and the more strongly they are joined together. Thus, more perfect metals are then generated from them. Question. Since the philosopher generally says that sulfur coagulates, it must be said that it does not. Because all common sulfur, according to the philosopher, is foreign and contrary to metals, as Avicenna says, it does not enter into the work unless it originates from it. Because it always infects, blackens, and corrupts, by whatever means it is prepared through artifice. For it is itself infected fire, and thus is impeded by fusion. But if it is calcined, it returns to the earthly substance, like dead dust. How, then, can it inspire life in others? For it has a double excess, namely, an inflammable substance and an earthly filth. Therefore, considering these points, the sulfur of the common people is not the sulfur of the philosophers, since the sulfur of the philosophers is a simple, living fire, vivifying and maturing other dead bodies, so that it fills the defect of nature, as it has an excess of maturity, according to which in its own nature it is perfect, and by art is more and more purified. Whence Avicenna, such sulfur is not found upon the earth, except insofar as it exists in the bodies of the sun and moon, and in another, which is that which is said to be revealed only to those to whom God reveals it. In the sun, however, it is more perfect because it is more digested and cooked. How it is possible for smaller metals to be artificially made into metals. Chapter 7. But because it was determined in the preceding chapter that smaller metals cannot be artificially made into metals, it remains to be proven here. First, thus, because smaller metals are not generated from the primary material of metals, which is mercury, since their generation differs from the generation of mercury in form, nature, and composition, therefore they also cannot be made into metals, because for things of the same species, there is one primary matter and sperm from which they are generated. The first part of the preceding is clear, that smaller metals are not generated from mercury, which is the cause because it always remains in the primary matter of metals, and not from foreign sulfur. Thus, Aristotle and Avicenna, therefore, if metals were to be made, it would be necessary that they first pass into the primary matter of metals. But since this cannot be done artificially, it is therefore impossible for metals to be made from them. Thus, the first part of the preceding is clearly demonstrated. Secondly, for the same reason, because smaller minerals cannot be artificially made into metals, which is mercury, therefore, they also do not reach the middle and the end, which are metal. In the case of humans, a human cannot be made unless it first turns into sperm, and thus, by adding to it, a human is generated. But because smaller metals have a nature foreign to metals, although they do participate in some mineral power, and are of weaker virtue, and are burnable, therefore metallic nature does not rejoice in them, but rejects them, and preserves those things which are of its own nature. For example, if water is mixed with earth, they are separated from each other because earth seeks the ground as it is heavy and dry, while water seeks the surface. And they can by no means be artificially joined in such a way that these contrary natures stand together in one nature. Indeed, water can wash and purify the earth, but that the dryness of the earth should be artificially changed into an aqueous moisture, this should not be believed, even though the earth may become moist with water. Thus, smaller minerals can be combined with metals, and they can purify them and, in some way, introduce a new form, but to remain with them and mature them into the perfect state, nature does not allow. Therefore, fools, like those engaged in various and sophistical enterprises, lead people astray, namely with things that are disproportionate, which neither give matter nor receive it, namely, the eyes of animals, the shells of eggs, the hair, the blood of a red man, the basilisk, both artificial and natural, worms, plants, roots, and human excrement. For many fools have labored, and still labor, in these vegetable and sensible things, where, however, they have found nothing of truth, but certain humors, about which we warn the ignorant, so that they may avoid deceptions. For from these things to be discussed later, they had, over a long time, extracted what they called artificial living silver, and oils, and waters, which they named the four elements, namely water, air, earth, and fire, and into ammoniacal salt, arsenic, and sulfur, and orpiment, which they could have bought better in the market, and completed more quickly. They also sought in vegetable and sensible things, those lacking moisture, and of the drier, combustible, and corruptible tinctures, which they do not possess. These, however, were damaged by evident loss. And these are the reasons: human hair, the brain, human saliva, women's milk, human blood, urine, excrement, embryos, menstruation, and sperm, the bones of the dead, chicken eggs, and simply in all brute animals, fish, and birds, worms, and meats, scorpions, bison, the natural and artificial basilisk, in which the greatest delusion exists, in tortoises, and in the juices of certain herbs, and the flowers of trees, and especially in these, namely, lunar and solar herbs, which are called toxic. And in all those in which they invented names according to their own liking, deceiving themselves and others with metals, desiring to perfect the best with the worst things, and to fulfill nature's defect with such things, imagining no true virtue in them, nor seeking it, wanting to sow excrement and reap wheat, which seems impossible for practical use. Therefore it is said, if a man sows these and reaps, then he sows excrement, and he will also reap filth. Therefore, it is not surprising that hardly 1 in 1,000, or none, of such people accomplishes the sowing of gold and silver, and brings you 1,000-fold fruit, with their labor, through nature's mediation, because nature alone has what you seek, and no other thing in the world, since all other things, like foul-smelling substances, yield to nature through the constant action of fire and trial. There are also other alchemists working with smaller minerals, namely in the four spirits, such as in the sulfur of the common people, arsenic, orpiment, and in ammoniacal salt, wanting to perfect a tincture from these, but they cannot do this, as is clear from the definition of tincture. Because to tincture is nothing other than transforming the tinged substance into its own nature through the act of tincturing, and to remain with it without any transformation, teaching nature to battle against fire. For the nature of the tinger and the tinged is in harmony. For example, if you have tinged lead, or tin, or any such thing with gold or silver, this agrees in nature, because the origin of both comes from Mercury. The mature joins with the immature so that the immature may be perfected in this way. But since these four spirits have a nature different from metals, as has been sufficiently stated before. Therefore, if they are to tincture, I ask whether they must be converted, or converted themselves. If they must be converted, then it is not tincture, as is clear from the definition. If they are to convert, then by tincturing, they convert into their own nature, which is a terrestrial nature, foreign to the metallic nature. Therefore, by tincturing, they cannot make a metal. That it converts into its own nature by tincturing is proven, because everything that generates something similar to itself. But because here the tincture of the four spirits is generative, the earth, when heated, will generate something similar to itself, which is earthly, like itself. Thus, you should despise this tincture and all others that are not found in the proper nature, along with other foreign methods, because in them there is nothing but the consumption of things, the loss of time, and labor, since all other apparent results are non-existent metals, which have been worked on by lesser minerals or similar substances. Therefore, it is foolish to seek in something that is not in it, and so on, as in seeking gold and silver in foul-smelling and burnable things. Concerning the simple philosophical sulfur, which does not burn. Chapter 8. The philosophers have subtly imagined how they could extract those more perfect sulfurs from these bodies and purify their qualities through art, so that they might attain, through art using nature as a medium, that which had not previously appeared in them, although they had it fully and secretly beforehand. And they assert that this cannot be accomplished without the dissolution of the body and its reduction to the first matter, which is quicksilver, from which they were originally made. This must be done without the admixture of foreign substances, as foreign materials do not perfect our stone, since nothing benefits a thing except what is closest to it. This is because it is a medicine of simple and virtual nature, produced from mercurial water, in which gold and silver were previously dissolved. For example, if ice is placed in plain water, it dissolves in it through heat and returns to its original aqueous substance. In this way, the water is tinged by the hidden virtue that was also present in the ice. However, if the ice is not dissolved by heat into water, it does not unite with the water in which it lies, nor does it tinge that water with its virtue, which had previously been coagulated within it in terms of its properties. In the same way, if you do not dissolve the body into mercury, you cannot obtain the hidden virtue from it with mercury, namely the digested and cooked sulfur prepared by nature's work within the mine. Thus, the stone is a single medicine, which the philosophers call rebes, the dual thing, from two substances, namely body and spirit, white or red. In this, many fools have gone astray. How red sulfur is in the sun and white sulfur in the moon. Chapter 9. Since it has been said that the red sulfur of the philosophers exists in the sun through greater digestion, and the white sulfur in the moon through lesser digestion. Hence, the philosopher says, citronation is nothing other than complete digestion. For heat acting upon moisture first produces blackness, and when acting upon dryness, it causes whiteness. If the fire continues to act upon this whiteness, it transforms it into the purest citronitas, a golden yellow state. All these things can be observed in the calcination of lead. The philosopher also says, since each of the perfected bodies already contains its own good sulfur with mercury, namely, gold, golden, and silver, silvery, therefore, white sulfur through citron is gold. Wherefore, the sulfur in it is red sulfur, that is, the substance of fire, which has further digested this white. And thus white and red sulfur exist on both sides in the sun. Therefore, fire is its perfection, and it is generated in fire. And so, it joyfully delights in its own fiery nature. Therefore, certain external things cannot cause this in bodies, since art is nothing other than, through nature, the cooking and digestion of that nature through simple effort. For example, in the morning when I wake and see my urine is white, I judge that I have not slept enough. Then I lie down again to sleep, and after sleeping, the urine becomes citron. And this is due to the greater digestion of the natural heat existing within me. Thus, follow nature through art to similarly cook, digest, and mature substantially, since nature already contains within itself the natural fire by which it is matured. Other things do not have this, and therefore cannot give it. In the moon, there is only simple white sulfur, not yet digested like the red nor deprived of its blackness through the action of heat, which it naturally contains within itself. But the form of fire is veiled and hidden, and you will bring it forth more through art than through nature. And therefore, it is not impossible that art, through nature, can further digest and perfect this, since it naturally tends toward perfection. However, it cannot do so by itself unless it is moved by art and operation. But these efforts, I believe, do not reach a stiff-necked person. And therefore, true gold is not made unless it is digested and cooked in such a way that the better improves the worse. For the intention of all philosophers is to perfect the worse with the better. Fools, however, understand it the opposite way, for they try to perfect the better with the worse. And they seek in a thing what was never in it, namely, gold and silver in combustible substances, as has been said above. It is not useful to seek this sulfur in other sick bodies because it is not there. Chapter 10. It may not unreasonably be asked whether this white and red sulfur can be extracted from other sick bodies to tincture mercury. I say no, because it has already been said that there is no substance of greater balance than what is found in these two bodies, in which reside the tincturing rays. For it has already been said that sick bodies contain fetid and combustible sulfur and not the virtual nature found in these, perfected bodies, etc., since no art is effective unless it follows a pre-existing nature. However, you can purify metals with smaller minerals, but even when purified, they still do not have the golden and silvery nature within them, because the golden digestion and cooking have not occurred in them, as in others, nor has the sulfur been matured in the same way. And therefore, the immature ones must be aided by the mature ones so that they may mature. From this, it is clearly evident that lesser minerals cannot die, or transmute, because imperfect metallic bodies, which do not agree with gold and silver in terms of mature mercury, cannot die, or transmute, nor can they impart the nature of gold or silver. Therefore, they do not tint, but are tinted, because the tincture of gold and silver has a proportional nature with them, namely, with the immature or imperfect ones, because it originates from mercury. From this, it is clearly evident that lesser minerals cannot tint, because imperfect metallic bodies, which do not harmonize with gold and silver in the mature aspect of mercury, cannot tint, nor infuse the nature of gold or silver. Therefore, it should not be tinted except with those that have the power to be tinted. Tint, therefore, with gold and silver, because gold imparts a golden color and nature. For this reason, disregard all others, in which there is not inherently or naturally the power of tinting, for in them there is no fruit, but only the destruction of things and the grinding of bones. How gold cures the infirmities of humans and the diseased bodies of metals. Chapter 11. Since among both the common people and the philosophers, gold holds its form because it remains in its first disposition, it cures leprosy and possesses many other virtues. This is due to its complete digestion, as the excellence of the fire acting upon it consumes all harmful humors present in diseased bodies, whether caused by heat or cold. However, silver cannot accomplish this because it does not possess such an excess of fire, nor is it as thoroughly digested and matured by natural processes. Nevertheless, despite this, silver possesses a hidden and virtual fiery nature, but not as fully as gold, because fire does not produce such elemental qualities in it as it does in gold. Therefore, silver, remaining in its first disposition, does not cure leprosy as powerfully unless it is first digested by art until it attains the highest degrees of gold's full maturity. For this reason, it cures other metallic bodies with less efficacy, according to how much they differ in imperfection and maturity from gold, and due to the defect of infected, foul, and burning sulfur, with which they were generated and coagulated from the beginning. Therefore, it does not cure. Since gold is of such great strength among the common people, even in its first disposition, it is not surprising, as experience shows, that if gold is processed in medicines through the artful assistance of nature, and its virtue is refined through digestion, decoction, and the purification of its qualities, it can then cure many or even all illnesses. This is evident from the highly skilled physician Arnold of Villanova, who cured Pope Innocent of an illness deemed incurable by other physicians using this medicine. It makes the old young again and brings about rejuvenation, preserves health, strengthens the natural constitution, and expels all bodily illnesses. It wards off poison from the heart, moistens the arteries, dissolves obstructions in the lungs, and, in short, makes the entire body fit and healthy. It is so precious that no one can afford it, and so rare that it can be found nowhere. Therefore, etc. Oh, blessed is the knowledge with its possessor, for whoever has it holds an incomparable treasure. He is born under a fortunate constellation, enriched above all others in this world, and honored before God and men, not through usury, fraud, or false merchandise, nor through the exploitation of the poor or the oppression of subjects, as the powerful of this world are now enriched. But this treasure is acquired through the labor of the hands and the industry of the mind. Therefore, he is blessed. The philosophers have recognized the truth, therefore, they established this knowledge based on the motion of nature and imitated its method. No philosopher has ever been found to have spoken falsehoods, though they have spoken obscurely, and this they did because of its nobility. Some, however, write in their books with falsehoods and contradictions. Beware of its odor, lest it kill you. Behold the kind of medicine and contradiction that, while it ought to heal, brings death. It is not surprising that toxic substances, composed of poisons, can do this. See, fools, how your works differ from the work of nature. Why do you weary yourselves with such lofty matters, which you cannot reach by such labor unless it happens miraculously, as it did with blessed John, who made gold from striped rods? I tell you, as the medicine is, so too is the gold. Return to the path of truth for your own sake. I advise you to study and reflect upon the sayings of the wise, from which you may draw out the truth. Do not approach the work haphazardly. Do not pay attention to, take this, take that, I don't know what, do it this way, I don't know how. Teach me this, and I will teach you that. Thus, one deceived person deceives another, and in this way, the whole world has been defrauded by such people. For if a blind man leads another blind man, both fall into a ditch. Whenever you see the word recipe, understand that it means deceive, by changing the R to D. These are the particulars perfected in this art. Chapter 12. Universally, to all those who will come across these words, I declare. For in the entire series of this art, there are only two particulars which are specifically perfected according to the philosophers and nature. The first particular exists both in white and in red mercury, without the administration of perfect medicine. Although the body with which it is perfected secretly contains its tincture within itself, as nature requires. The first thing that is specifically perfected in it from both species of things is this. Since mercury is composed from the primal matter of all metals, made from excessively white earth, sulfur, and clear water. Therefore, the whiteness of the earth reveals the transparency of the water, and in it, there is the brightest color, as experience teaches. And it contains within itself good, mature, and pure sulfur. Then, it is possible from it to specifically create the sun and the moon. The philosopher is to be mixed through the art with other metallic bodies, because it is of their nature, and they were generated by it. Therefore, through art, it is possible to imitate the nature that has been digested in it, so that it may be perfected with them. And thus, it becomes similar to the metals it embraces, without any foreign mixture, since nature simply delights in its own nature, and not through something external. But with the sun, it becomes the sun, with the moon, with Venus, Venus, and so on. When each one sends its force into it, and also because it contains within itself its good and immature sulfur, which is matured through art. But other metals, coagulated and infected by sulfur, cannot specifically become like it, neither the sun nor the moon. The reasoning is, if mercury were transformed and mixed with the sun and moon, then its mercury would have in itself pre-existing bad sulfur. And if it were purified, it could not be so thoroughly purified that it would return to mercury, as before such simplicity. It is necessary that the body can be dissolved in mercury. And when it cannot be dissolved, then its hidden force also cannot be introduced into it. But naturally, from both parts of the bonded substance, each one in the examination is separated from the other, since in itself it does not secretly have a perfect nature, with which they could properly complete their dissolutions. Nothing can be dissolved into mercury in it. And when it cannot be dissolved, then neither can it send its stored force into it. But the natural force from each side of the stored matter is separated from the other in the examination, since it does not have within itself the perfect nature secretly with which, through their solutions, they could be perfected. But since it is always necessary for them, through art, that other perfect bodies assist them with their nature, which is naturally perfect. Secondly, if unresolved bodies were added to the perfect bodies, less gold and silver could be made, since naturally, through solidification, both sides of their nature are stored. And when there is no medium opening those natures to send one force into the other, they cannot be united by natural conjunction so as to return to mercury, which both sides originated from. Therefore, through the intensity of fire, they are separated by the imperfect combustion of their nature, as is clearly seen. Thus, when you wish to unite them, make mercury through mercury, which dissolves and opens the separated natures, so that one can simply pass into the other, and the perfect can send its force into the imperfect, so that it may be perfected with it. And these are the labors of the particular way. And thus, gold and silver can specifically be made, not because crude mercury dissolves bodies and reduces them to their primal matter or nature. But crude mercury cannot do this, and this is because of the crudity of its sulfur, which it had in its first generation. However, crude mercury made from clear water at the beginning always seeks to corrode, and first, it corrodes what is closest to its nature, namely gold, silver, and so on. But the other mercury, made from bodies that are solidified, cannot do this, because through solidification, the crude sulfur that was in it before has been altered in nature. It does not corrode like the first one, nor does it open the stored matter. Therefore, one force is not sent into the other, but each remains by itself. Indeed, they are joined in a fluctuating manner, but naturally, from both sides, they are stored. Therefore, through examination and the harshness of fire, the imperfect is consumed, with the perfect remaining, because one nature cannot assist the other. But with crude living silver, this can happen, namely, the natures can be restored and opened, so that each thing close to it may help its own nature. Thus, if silver is dissolved, its silver nature will be found; if gold, its golden nature will be found; if lead, its leaden nature, and so on. Through their sulfur, they are solidified. Hence the philosopher says, "But not other bodies that do not share their nature, as you seek in many foul and impure things." Therefore, it is specifically possible from both sides to make gold and silver from it, and not in other bodies, as you have heard. Note, there are two kinds of solution of bodies into mercury by mercury, and into mercurial water. The first solution is required for the particulars. The second is for the universals. The first solution of bodies into mercury is nothing other than resolution, that is, through pure resolution the stored matter is opened, due to the entry of one nature into another. And this resolution is in the particulars. The second solution is into mercurial water and happens universally. And this occurs, not through the mere dissolution of immature sulfur into mercury, but through the putrefaction of the body and spirit in the moist. For putrefaction is the solution and separation of all natures bound together. Thus, the parts bound to one another are separated, and each part is separated from the other. This happens through the separation and solution of the elements, which in the generation of mercury are connected, namely, water and earth. And these same parts, when purified in nature through conversion, are united, and they love each other more because of their purification than they did before in nature. But this separation cannot happen in bodies except through the spirit. Thus, the art transcends nature in one way, although artificial things are quickly made, which, however, were previously naturally prolonged. Do not, however, believe that these are the common elements, such as cloud water or similar things. Rather, the cold and dry is earth, the cold and wet is water, the wet and hot is air, and the hot and dry is fire. Thus, they are in the natures of the elements. However, no art can separate the connected parts in generation in such a way that they are simply transformed into the elements that they were, since the first nature changes one quality into another. Thus, the art can separate well, such as separating the wet from the dry, the cold from the hot. Yet, one quality still possesses the nature of the other in some part of the natural mixture, and through these, they can be reunited by art in reverse, just as they were divided. If it were not the case that one quality participates in the nature of the other, namely, water participating in the nature of earth in coldness, air participating in the nature of water in humidity, and so on with the others, then it would follow that the natural work would be totally destroyed, as the elements would be as simple as they were before the generation of Mercury. The art would have destroyed nature, starting from the head, namely from gold and silver, all the way back to the beginning, that is, to living silver. And beyond these principles of the simple elements, according to how they were before the generation of Mercury, it is impossible in the art to go so far. If it were possible, it would follow that, anew, outside the first matter of the mercury of metals, the art would compose the elements, and conversely, the art would generate mercury as it had destroyed it, which is impossible to do artificially. Indeed, when the art is destroyed from head to foot, that is, when mercury is built from the foot to the head in a more subtle form with the substance of nature, which it was before, the art permits it. Thus, the species of things are divided when they are transmuted into a different form than they were before. As the philosopher testifies, you would say, "Let the alchemists know that the species of things cannot be altered," which indeed is true, unless they are transmuted or converted into the first matter, that is, into living silver. And beyond this, it does not advise. To make it otherwise is impossible. The particular is in the sun, mercury, and sulfur of the philosophers. Chapter 13. As it has been said before, the moon contains in itself white sulfur, just like red gold. However, the species of fire beneath the whiteness in it is concealed. Therefore, all silver can be made into gold. Hence, the philosopher says, there is no gold unless it was first silver. Thus, silver contains within itself some undigested qualities, which can be purified by art, so that it particularly transforms into fixed mercury and into the closest nature of gold, because then it contains within itself what gold also has, through the addition of the red sulfur of the philosophers, which is further refined, and the yellowing is caused in it as an aid to the perfect body, since they are simply of one nature. And this happens through the solution of the lunar body from dry to wet, and then the same simple nature becomes more obedient to the digestive nature for the introduction of the red sulfur of the philosophers that does not burn. This cannot happen in other bodies, because they do not have the same proximity to the perfect nature as the moon itself, which is hindered in their generation by burnable and fetid sulfur, nor are they mercury, of which the philosopher speaks. There is no transition from one extreme to another unless through a medium, that is, gold is not generated from mercury unless it was first silver. Nor do they have within themselves the sulfur of simple fire that does not burn, but burning sulfur. Therefore, they cannot specifically be transformed into fixed mercury, as was said by Aristotle. Let the artificers know, etc. But they can do similar things and stain it with red or yellow so that it appears as gold, and whiten it so that it is much like silver. They can also cleanse the impurity of lead or other sick bodies so that it appears as gold or silver. However, lead always remains lead, because it does not have within itself the digested qualities of gold and silver, as was stated above. Similarly, those who take ammoniac salt or other lesser minerals to deceive people, and combine copper or tin with mercury so that it appears to people as silver, and in some way can be worked with or tested in fire, according to those who are experienced in fire. However, they are deceived in this, because they do not have the true silver nature within them, as is evident from their color and examination. The first reason is, copper contains within itself a kind of pure mercury, unless it is infected by strong sulfur, because sulfur has a fetid and burnable quality within it, which consumes the copper, and it has an imperfect redness due to the impure red sulfur, while mercury has the substance of sulfur. And therefore, it is slower to burn in fire than lead or tin, because mercury resists fire, unless it suffers violence from the sulfur mixed with it. Note, therefore, divide the good sulfur from mercury before copper, as you know. But the reason why lead burns faster is because of the infected mercury, because the infected mercury, with imperfect sulfur, like that of lead, seeks something related to its imperfection. And when silver and copper are mixed, in silver it finds only the infected substance, but in copper, it first finds burning sulfur, which mixes more quickly. In the universal mixture, mercury becomes more infected by copper, since lead is infected by both mercury and sulfur. Also, because more evil more quickly adheres to evil, the weaker and worse it will be, and thus it more quickly adheres to copper or silver, infecting and burning it with the nature of copper and silver, as you have heard, since it is sealed by a worse substance and cannot be helped. Therefore, lead burns copper away from silver, which is more slowly separated without lead, since the more imperfect something is, the weaker and more combustible it will be. But in the conjunction of tin with copper and mercury, it in some way opens the natures and unites these two, namely tin and copper, with mercury being in some way purified on both sides. And when tin has pure mercury, and bad sulfur, weakly mixed, mercury joins with mercury, and mercury always has the potential of sulfur, changing the color of copper, which exists in sulfur, so that a new form appears, and also, sulfur cannot burn as quickly as before by mercury. And when crude mercury coagulates through itself, it alternates with them in nature, so that it in some way appears as silver, although it is truly not silver, since it has not undergone the proper digestion and cooking, and the sulfur of simple fire and the virtual nature of silver, from which gold and silver are sufficiently digested and matured through both mercury and sulfur, and in every perfect digestion. Thus, you have the sophistic silver made from tin, copper, and mercury. And if you then mix in some powders of lesser minerals, it is not impossible if mercury acts beyond its power. However, it is always still imperfect, and in the end, it diminishes and burns in the fire, because sulfur is not of the virtual nature like mercury itself, but is always secretly susceptible and will corrupt mercury, no matter how well mercury is supplied. And thus, it will later return to dung, just as it was before. Therefore, understand how true gold and silver differ from the sophistic, although many sophistications are made in the same way by other metals into red and white, with the addition of lesser minerals or some of them. Those who labor in this are deceived, for they think they have found the true appearance. This is caused by their ignorance, because they do not understand the nature of metals. On the nature of mercury. Chapter 14. Know that mercury, whether in the earth by the work of nature or externally by the work of art, is never made corporeal unless it is mortified and retained. It is mortified and retained through proper sublimation, by the imbibing of sharp waters, by feeding it with related filings, and especially by the vapor of sublimated and prepared sulfur. This leads to its coagulation into hardness and metallic form. The most refined feeding of mercury is white marcasite for white and red marcasite for red. Know that this has been tested. Be cautious in its sublimation and experienced, for I have seen that when it is sublimated in a glass vessel with a long neck, specially prepared for this purpose, it always remains the same no matter how often it is sublimated. It does not dry further, nor harden, nor does it have an opening above through which its fleeting and watery moisture can evaporate. However, when in sublimation or during other preparations it begins to become nodular, then know that it is already converting into the form you intend. According to this observation, keep a close eye on it and proceed in the work along the correct path. This final chapter is attributed to Callisthenes. Finish.